Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to Season 4, Episode 22 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast. We give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout Week 5 and the rest of the 2024 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap, who is dressed in all black like he's attending a funeral. The funeral.
This is Navy. This is Navy. I don't know what funeral you're talking about.
That looks a little black.
Well, I guess a little on the camera.
That's a dark navy. It's darker than a Seahawks navy. But we are 4 weeks into the NFL season, which is bad. That means we're 1/4 of the way done with the regular season. That's bad. And the only good coming from it is that we are now seeing trends within our fantasy football players, teams, NFL teams, etc. Are those trends good or bad for your teams? That's what we're here to talk about. And that's why we're doing our weekly recap show like we do on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I have to say, this might have been one of the worst football weekends for me in the history of the Primetime FF Pod. Between, my team that rhymes with Nets, my beloved Rashee Rice, and getting tackled by his own quarterback. Some of my opinions on the show, like my DeAndre Swift take, where he decides to finally show up and show out. It might have been between the Primetime FF Pod, my actual team, and my fantasy teams. One of my worst weeks in fantasy. I'm going to be fully candid going into the show. So we had to do the change of wardrobe to signal the cleansing of the bad and into the new and great as my team travels to London.
Patrick Mahomes should get negative fantasy points for that. Who's not been a good quarterback this year from fantasy football standpoint, which is something that we said during the regular or the offseason. But I digress. We will get into that. This is our Tuesday show. Thank you to all of you guys that joined us for our live this past Sunday. If you're a new listener, if you listen to the live show, now you're here, welcome. We give you 2 shows a week on a Tuesday and a Friday. This is the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. You could find us on YouTube and all audio streaming platforms, plus all social media channels for direct contact throughout the week. Like I said, this is our Tuesday show. On Tuesdays, we start off with a waiver wire segment, giving you players from each position and defenses that you can stream. So you have players to pick up and set your waivers by 3 a.m. Wednesday tomorrow morning. And then we give you a show normally on Fridays. Sometimes it's Thursdays, but normally Fridays. We give you our all boom, all bust teams for that week. And then we end the show with a segment that basically says, here are one player from me, one player from Nick that we think you should pick up before the week actually starts, so you don't have to worry about the waiver wire the next week. The 2 players that we used last Friday was Roschon Johnson and Romeo Doubs. The week before that was Jalen Tolbert and I have to pull it up here, and Bucky Irving. So we'll talk about that this Friday. But let's start off here with the waiver wire segment. This is waiver wire week 5. So I've compiled a list for you guys. We have 3 quarterbacks, 3 running backs, 4 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and 3 defenses you can stream for week 5. So, Nick, let's start off with the quarterbacks. First off is Geno Smith, who's still only owned in 29.1% of leagues. And then I have here Justin Fields, owned in 34% of leagues, and Andy Dalton, who's owned in 8.9% of leagues. So who do you like out of these guys?
I mean, I definitely want to target that Geno Smith matchup. The Giants defense has not looked great for the majority of the season, really. They did a good job controlling the ball and giving the Cowboys limited opportunity. But even with the limited opportunity, we watched CD have a good game. Dak had a pretty solid fantasy day. Rico Dowdle found the end zone. So they're still susceptible. And the Seattle offense has been one of the more up-tempo teams in football. I know they've been running the ball well, but the receivers have done really well. Geno's been really good. He's been consistent. So Geno has definitely got a great matchup there. We saw Fields kind of have a big game where the game script favored him having to pass and be more mobile, not just manage the clock. This past week, which is pretty solid. And Dalton's been really good for fantasy. So I think all 3 of these options are very playable, but Geno has shown the most consistency. He might not have as much upside as Justin Fields, but I think if you need a solid starter in a good matchup against a weaker defense, I like the Geno play.
So I do want to know, Geno Smith is quarterback 12 as of our recording. So we're recording Monday night about 6 o'clock before the Monday Night Football matchup. We'll see where Geno kind of shakes out. But in his 3 games he's played, he has 2 of those games over 17 points. The third one is only 13.4 against the Dolphins, where I think they kind of ran the ball a bit more. If we look at weeks 1 to 4 now, again, Geno, we can't talk about Geno because he hasn't had his 4th game. So he's obviously lower on the weeks 1 to 4 list. Justin Fields is your quarterback 6 on the season. Last 2 games are 19.4 and 32. And Andy Dalton is further down the list, but again, he's only played 2 weeks. I'm actually gonna I'm on Fantasy Pros here. I'm gonna actually filter it to weeks 3 to 4. And Andy Dalton, in the 2 games he has started, he is the quarterback 8, 24.6 and then 16.7. Like Nick said, I think there's options here. I think Geno will have a couple more of the easier matchups, but definitely play the matchups with these guys, especially if you're struggling with the quarterback position. I don't think we've seen many serious injuries to the quarterback so far this year, but I hate to be that guy. What'd you say?
Knock on wood.
I hate to be that guy, but something's going to happen. So make sure you have a backup. And there are options right now.
Yeah.
Moving on to running backs, Rico Dowdle owned in 43% of leagues. And we do base the percentage off of ESPN, but I bet Dowdle's owned in most of your leagues. Trey Sermon back up to Jonathan Taylor, who did tweak his I think it was his ankle. The report is that he's fine, but if you're a Taylor owner, I think you have to go pick up Trey Sermon, owned in 0.8% of leagues, and then Kareem Hunt owned in 21.4% of leagues. I do want to know for Rico Dowdle, Nick, I don't know if you have this note, but his rushing shares over weeks 3 and 4 have been 61.5% and 61.1%. I think he has become the number one in this backfield. He hasn't been super duper productive. He hasn't actually looked good, but he does seem to be the bell cow. So I think he's the number one here if he's available, but I actually doubt he's available in most competitive leagues.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Dowdle deserves the share, but if I am targeting someone, it's definitely going to be Kareem Hunt. His snap share went up significantly. It's trending in the right direction. Carson Steele was pretty much unused in this game.
He fumbled when he was done. He got me -4 in our league, and that's going to cost me, honestly. Like, I'm gonna lose this week. I'm gonna end up 1-3 due to losing Pacheco and due to Mark Andrews just becoming a ghost this season. So that's not fun.
So Steele only played on 11 snaps. Kareem Hunt got the most snap share in his second game with the team. He ran the second most routes from any of the running backs, got the most rushing attempts, got 14 out of the team's 21. So that's good numbers for him. He's going to be more involved in the passing game. I mentioned earlier, Rashee Rice obviously got the injury during the game. Travis Kelce has looked like a shell of himself. No Hollywood, no Pacheco at the moment. So he's definitely going to need to get filtered into this game in some way for the next few weeks. So I really like the opportunity Kareem Hunt has, especially with the trends we're seeing in his usage. I know he's only been on the team for 2 weeks, but week 1 or first week, nothing. And then this week he gets a lot of the workload. So I think that trend is good. And we saw, I know it's been a while, it's been 5 years since he's been on the Chiefs, but we saw what he could do with Patrick Mahomes. And we've watched Pacheco be like a top 10 type running back. We've watched Clyde be a top running back. We've watched Kareem Hunt years ago be a top back. So this is a system that it's not superstar for running back, but it's always been like guys near the top 12. It might not be the league winner, but for a guy that was undrafted in pretty much every league because he was not on a team, it's great upside. And I don't know if you're going to find that this late in the draft. But to Nick's point, Dowdle has the upside of being the season-long league winner, where Kareem Hunt, once Pacheco comes back, he probably is getting filtered out of this offense most.
Yep. So. Moving on to receivers, we have some really good receivers here, Nick, if they're available in your leagues, and they should be available, most of them at least. So we have Jets wide receiver 1, Alan Lazard, owned in 40% of leagues. He is the wide receiver 16 on the season. He has 3 out of his 4 games over double-digit fantasy points, one of them over 20 fantasy points. I think he has like 6 or 7 targets a game at this point. He's owned in 40% of ESPN leagues. I don't think he's available in most leagues, competitive leagues, but if he is, he's an option. Wan'Dale Robinson's your running back, is your wide receiver 20 on the season. He has double-digit fantasy points in 3 out of 4 weeks as well. Just garnering a massive target share over there with the Giants. Then we have Dontavian Wicks, who is another receiver on the Packers. Obviously, Christian Watson went out with an injury this week, so if you lost Watson, Wicks could be an option. I think he had like an absurd number of targets this week. This
13.
13 targets. He scored 24.8 fantasy points, 2 touchdowns. And then we have Xavier. I guess I didn't put the percentage for Robinson. So Wanda Robinson's owned in 27.1% of leagues. Dontavian Wicks is owned in only 9.5% of leagues. And the last player here, we have a Xavier Legette, who is owned in 25% of leagues. With Andy Dalton, I think he had 13 targets this week. He had 19.6 fantasy points with a touchdown. So Dalton's made that rookie have a lot more value. So
yeah,
Nick, I don't know how you kind of rank these guys, but I think they're all very rosterable and playable. If I had my pick of the litter, I would probably go Lazard, Robinson, Legette, and then Wicks.
I would probably go the total opposite way, which is pretty funny. I'd go Wicks, Legette, Robinson, then Lazard. And Nick and I, we like having different opinions because we give you the opportunity to listen to different takes. Here's my thought process with Wicks. Wicks saw 13 targets on the very high-powered Packers offense. This team in week 1 and week 4 with Jordan Love is putting up a lot of fantasy points. And we said it in the offseason that the Packers, this division is meant to be shootouts. I mean, we saw the Vikings, we know the Lions. Like, there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of players to score. And with Christian Watson's injury, which saw the 3rd most routes run on the team, which isn't great. But with that much of a target share, you have to imagine he's going to see the field even more over the course of the rest of the season. So I'm very high on the Packers, and I think that offense is going to be really great. Wan'Dale Robinson, I mean, there's going to need to be someone other than Malik Neighbors, and now that Robinson's seeing the cornerback too on teams, he's getting that opportunity. Legette, rookie, big body. He's got a similar, like a slightly smaller build than DK, but that size will work in Carolina. If Andy Dalton keeps playing like this, like Joe Flacco did at the back half of the year, like he produced elite numbers for Amari Cooper, David Njoku, like, bigger, more talented receivers. So if Legette, who I believe he was either the last pick of the first round or the first pick of the second round, like that's a heavy draft capital to put into a guy. So you can definitely expect a rookie with that build on an offense that is coming into its own to be really good. And I don't trust Allen Lazard. I think the Jets are going to make some calls for another wide receiver because I think it's destined at this point. I don't know if it's going to be Adams, but I don't think he's holding on to that role. And I do think Mike Williams is starting to really infringe on that offense a lot more. So as good as Lazard has been and is worth the roster spot, I still don't think anyone's going to comfortably start him. I think the other 3 have more of a chance to be comfortable.
Oh, I'm going to comfortably start him. And here's my thing. So I'll give my take here. Rodgers has played with Lazard before. I think Rodgers wanted to play with Lazard again with the with the Jets. So in 2 out of 4 games, he has 8 targets and 9 targets. The other 2 games, not as much against New England and Tennessee. But I'll digress more on the Jets offense a little bit more on the show. But there's a guy that Rodgers trusts. And it doesn't seem like the other receivers have that trust with Rodgers right now. I think the Jets offense has to improve throughout the season. And if they do, Lazard's going to continue to garner a lot of targets. I don't think they have to make calls about receiver. They need to make calls about that offensive line, or Rodgers isn't going to make it to week 16. That line looks horrendous. I'll talk. I want to save my opinions, but they look really bad.
They looked really good through 3 weeks. I don't know what Denver did. I was listening, and I highly recommend everybody do this. I was listening to Cowherd's show on the way home from work today, and he had Peter Schrager on, and I'm not going to give the full story because Schrager gave it way better. But the Broncos stayed on the East Coast. They stayed in like West Virginia for some reason, and then they didn't know that the hurricane was coming, so they did their entire walkthrough on like a clay tennis court in sneakers for the game. Like they were totally in a position to be underprepared for this game, and the way that Schrager detailed it was there was something about the team being like in that atmosphere that made that defense like hungry for like knowing that they were that big of an underdog and having like all this odds stacked against them wanting to play out. And granted they did, but we'll hear next points, but there's some broken stuff.
Well, the line looked bad against the 49ers too. And the 49ers are a better defense, but against
I think they only allowed 1 sack and 3 pressures though. So and Rodgers was not moving out of the pocket as much. I think that
he's never going to move out of the So something has to change, but that's why I like Lazard. I like Wanda Robinson because I love target shares, and 3 out of 4 games he has 8+ targets. He clearly has a connection with Daniel Jones. I don't think the Giants are going to make a quarterback change. I don't know what the quarterback change could be. I know Drew Lock is waiting in the rafters, but I'm not sure if that would even happen. So as long as Daniel Jones is the quarterback, I think Wanda Robinson's going to get a pretty high target share, and they're going to be down in just about every game this season. He's never going to face the quarterback one as long as Malik Neighbors is on the field. They're not going to run the football because that's not effective. So I like that target share. I think Leggett is fine. I like taking chances on rookies. My gripe with Wicks is my gripe with all the Packers receivers coming into the season. Who's the number one? There isn't a number one. It's the same thing with the Bills receivers. So I don't want to invest high capital into a guy that I don't know is going to be the number 1 or 2 every single week. Jacobs is still there. Jalen Reed really seems like the guy, but he also likes Dobbs. Watson will be back at some point. There's just so many mouths to feed, and there isn't an alpha dog. And I don't think Wicks is the alpha dog. If I thought he was the alpha dog, I'd be higher on him. But I feel like this could be a 1 week wonder. And I don't think this week was the best example of what we're going to see from the Packers offense. They got blown out. I took a nap on Sunday. I think they were down 21-0 or something when I took my nap. And then they crawled their way back in there. They threw the ball on. Wicks got a lot of that. But on a week-to-week basis, when we see what the Packers offense truly is when they're actually in the football game, I don't know what we're going to see. So if I have if I have a later waiver and I get Wicks, I won't be unhappy. But if I have waiver number 1 or 2, he will not be my waiver 1 or 2. Going to tight ends, we have another Packer here. Tucker Kraft is only owned in 4.5% of leagues. I think another one that just benefited from the game script. He did run a lot more routes and was on the field a lot more than Luke Musgrave, so he does seem like the tight end 1 with the Packers. Only owned in 4.5% of leagues. Then we have Taysom Hill, who had a monster game, owned in 27.2% of leagues. He did get a little bit banged up. I don't think it's serious, though. I'm at the point, Nick, where I would rather start Taysom Hill than Mark Andrews in our league. Because I will take the upside of the rushing nonsense and the passing I typed in my group chat the other day that Taysom Hill is the most annoying NFL player of all time. And I didn't text it like I didn't have a bet against him. I didn't have fantasy against him. He did nothing to me on Sunday, but I still watched him play and I said, you are annoying. It's annoying to watch you play football because it just makes no sense, but it works. So I'm actually team Taysom Hill with the way that Kyle Pitts is playing, with the way that Andrew's playing, Kelsey. I'm cool with slotting Taysom Hill in and just hoping for the touchdown because he has a better chance. At least in my opinion, maybe it's because I have Mark Andrews scoring goose eggs on my starting lineup, but I'm more confident in just throwing Taysom Hill in there than Mark Andrews.
Sure. I mean, listen, I will not argue on that one. Mark Andrews back-to-back gooses. So, I'm a big Taysom Hill guy. I'm concerned about the injury. It's his 3rd rib injury since the offseason. So, but listen, he played through it. I think he missed 1 game out of the 4, so good for him. That does concern me, but hey, I love me some Taysom Hill. I'm going to give you one more that's not on the list. Cade Otton, for the past 2, and I don't know his ownership percentage. If you could look that up real quick.
Yep.
But I know he's not owned in a lot of leagues. This is back-to-back weeks. 9.7 2 weeks ago, 11.2. He has the highest snap share percentage of any tight end in all of football. So for a guy that's going to be, will be out on the field at least, unlike your Mark Andrews, who's not getting enough of a snap share, like it's guaranteed time on the field, and the Buccaneers are proving to be a very good offense. So if that's the case, I think I'd rather take, and you're not going to get
6.2% of leagues. He's back-to-back weeks with 8+ targets and 40+ yards.
So he's the first 2 weeks obviously with a struggle, but to the point, like, he's going to be on the field. He's got not a ton of upside necessarily, but he's on a high-scoring, high-volume offense. Evans is obviously a red zone threat, so you're probably not going to get the red zone targets you need. But like you mentioned, 8 targets at the tight end position back-to-back weeks, knowing he was on the field for 73 of 77 snaps this past game. Like, that's a good enough share for me to at least want him on my roster and maybe start him over a guy like Andrews who can't even get on the field.
And lastly, 3 defenses that you may want to consider streaming for week 5. The Seahawks are hosting the New York Giants. They are owned in 35.9% of leagues. The Vikings are hosting, they're They're facing the New York Jets in London, 45.7% of leagues. They're currently the number one ranked defense on ESPN. And the Patriots will be facing the Miami Dolphins, who will either be throwing out there Snoop Huntley or Skylar Thompson. They're owned in 2.1% of leagues. I'm much more cool with the Seahawks or the Patriots. The only reason I don't love the Vikings defense is London is wacky and those games exist in another universe. But I'm cool with actually picking up the Vikings defense just to make sure they're actually on your roster if they're available.
Totally agree. I'd roster the Vikings over the other two. I definitely want a piece of that Seahawks defense. They've looked really, really good, and it is very possible after tonight's game. You guys have seen it by now. But the Lions, they've had shootouts with the last 3 times that they've played.
The Lions are going to gash them tonight. The Seahawks are down 3 to 5 starters on the interior front 7, but none of them are serious injuries. They're not IR guys. They have a good shot of playing Sunday against the Giants. So you'll see whatever the score is of the Seahawks game. Actually hope that people drop the Seahawks defense so you go and scoop them up against the Giants.
Exactly. So that's kind of where I go. I think a lot of people will be deterred from the Seahawks if the Lions absolutely catch them, like Nick said. So I think the Seahawks have a very good matchup for this week, but I do agree. I think the Vikings have looked like they've had the best defense in football for 4 weeks, and Nick said the fantasy number, it shows it. I do not like the Jets matchup. Aaron Rodgers has historically owned the Minnesota Vikings. So it's a organization he's familiar with. There is a lot of continuity on the defense. There's a little bit of difference, but it's a lot of the same personnel and coaching that Rodgers saw in his time in Green Bay. So it shouldn't be anything crazy.
Different
new.
DC though. Flores is coaching them up. I think it's a different DC. I don't think he played with
Flores has been there. Is this his 3rd year there now? So he
if
might
it's
have
his
had
3rd year, then Rodgers has seen him. But if it's only his 2nd year, Rodgers hasn't seen him with the Vikings. So.
Okay, so yeah, we'll see. But I don't like playing against the Jets in London, like Nick mentioned.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to go to our top 5 fantasy football takeaways from week 4. They're not ordered in any particular order. Me and Nick just have 5 takeaways that we're going to give you. So Nick, why don't you go first with one of your takeaways? And Nick also wanted 3 of my takeaways. So Nick would also pile on to the takeaways that he did want to highlight.
Totally. So it's funny. The anonymous Raw general manager, as Nick and I have dubbed him, had told me that we had 3 of the same takeaways. So I'm going to give you the 2 that were unique first, and then the 3 I had to switch on the back half. But let's start with LSU is wide receiver U. We talk about, I think it's Iowa State we always say is tight end U. Well, LSU is wide receiver U. Let's take a look at 4 guys that we very much know. Jamar Chase, all 4 are ranked in the top 12. Is before Monday Night Football, so it's possible some of them get jumped. But here's what we're looking at. Jamar Chase, wide receiver 8 on the year. Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 3. Malik Neighbors, wide receiver 1. And the surprise rookie that Nick and I both loved and we're not talking enough about, Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver 12 on the season. He's averaging 14.5 points this past week, 6 catches on 9 targets, 86 yards, and a touchdown. And he got 1 rushing attempt this past week. I believe it was for like 15 yards. So they're finding a way to get him out there back-to-back weeks with 9 targets. And this offense on the Jaguars is not great, and they are constantly playing from behind. They had a good lead in this Texans game, and he still had great usage. I think Brian Thomas is going to emerge very quickly, as we're seeing now, and I think he's going to have a very good shot to finish inside the top 20, maybe in the top 10. I know there's a lot of guys that always fight for that spot, and it's hard to always predict who will keep there, but the consistency has been there for this rookie, and he's a guy that is going to get unnoticed because Xavier Worthy's had big games, and obviously Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. and Roma Dunze we have eyes on. Like, no one's talking about the Jaguars, as we should not be, but Brian Thomas is fighting, and he has been very, very good through 4 weeks. So let's keep our eye on him because he's got a ton of upside for the rest of the season.
I don't know which 3 takes Nick had the same as me. So I know one of them that it's not. So I'm going to try to play the fielder. So let's get it out of the way. Your Jets stink. They are still the Jets. They are still the Jets. And you know what, Nick? I didn't want to do this because I said Breece Hall was going to be the fantasy football MVP. I said I wanted to get Garrett Wilson in a couple leagues, and I did only get him in 1 league, not by choice, but because of the way the draft shook out. So I was not anti-Jets. But we are now 4 weeks in, and they look terrible. I don't know if it's a combination of coaching, which is bad. Salah's going to go, and so does Hackett. I said last year both of them should get canned. But for some reason, they're still there. The line looks horrendous. Even if they're not allowing the pressures and allowing the sacks per se, maybe the stats aren't telling the whole story. But every time I watch a Jet game, I mean, Tennessee's defense looked good against them. The only game that the Jets really looked good against was that New England game, and they needed that. They should have looked better against the Patriots. The Patriots are a top 5 bottom roster. Rodgers looks like a shell of his former self. Breece Hall's numbers have been good, except for this week where he only scored 3.8 points on 4 yards. He totally had the touchdown. The Red Sea was parted, and he just decided to skirt left for some reason. And then there's Garrett Wilson, who I think is up for bust of the year in terms of receivers at the moment. I mean, he's wide receiver 35, 4 straight weeks under 60 yards, all under 15 fantasy points. His highest fantasy point number is 14.5, and it's only because he had a touchdown. So really, it's like an 8-point game. So do I still have hope for these guys? Yes, I know what the talent is, but we're now 4 weeks in. Something has to change, and we need to see something change in the next month. When we're doing these takes at the end of October, if we're at week 8 and these are still numbers, then they're solidified busts at this point. Breece Hall right now is sitting at running back 9 on the year, and again, Monday Night Football has not happened, so we haven't seen Achane. We haven't, where's Achane right now? Achane's 12, so we haven't seen Achane play. We haven't seen Tony Pollard play. He's sitting at running back. I think he's much further down. He's running back 30. Jahmyr Gibbs hasn't played. He's running back 20. David Montgomery hasn't played, running back 18. Kenneth Walker hasn't played, who had a good week 1. So there's a chance when you guys listen to this episode on Tuesday that Breece Hall is sitting outside the top 10. And I'll be honest with you, Nick, that's a bust. That's a guy that people were drafting within their top 3, depending on, where they drafted. That is a bust. And the top 3 running backs right now are busts. McCaffrey, the only reason why Breece Hall isn't your bust of the year as a running back is because Christian McCaffrey exists and Kyle Shanahan is a liar and should be fined. There should be an investigation on that. Breece Hall's your running back 9. Bijan Robinson, where are you on this list? I'm scrolling trying to find Bijan Robinson. Maybe my eyes are just missing him, but Bijan's another one. I'm going to keep scrolling because I want to call out the number that he is. I can't find it. I'm looking on Fantasy Pros. I'm lost. 16. So your biggest, the running backs that actually have played well that were drafted at high capital, Saquon Barkley, who me and Nick were both very high on. Jonathan Taylor is running back 6, which I think he was drafted at running back 4 or 5. So I guess that's fine. Derrick Henry looks great. I liked Henry going into the season with the Ravens. Anyway, I digress. The Jets offense needs an uptick. Something's got to change because right now, Garrett Wilson feels borderline unplayable. Depending on your roster. Breece will still be playable, but Rodgers is tough to play too. So,
can I defend my Jets for a second?
I would like to say no because they lost to the Denver Broncos at home, and the Broncos are terrible. But as my co-host, I will let you defend them. But that loss is really not defendable. I don't care what the weather is. That was not.
I don't want to defend the loss because I will say this: if we hit that game-winning field goal, this is not as big of a football conversation. But at the same point, the Broncos missed a field goal that they should have made. That should have made it a touchdown game. I digress. We should have won the game. We did not win the game. Period. I'm going to defend the fantasy for a little bit because we're not really discussing how tough of a defensive schedule the Jets have had through 4 weeks. They went to San Francisco week 1 of the season when the 49ers were fully healthy except McCaffrey. That in Rodgers' first game back from the injury, a place he has historically struggled. Garrett Wilson sees Charvarius Ward, who by PFS is ranked as a top 5 cornerback in football. Breece Hall plays a fine game. Week 2, Tennessee Titans. Garrett Wilson gets L'Jarius Sneed, top 5 PFF corner. Titans defense, not great. Jets find a way to win the game. Probably shouldn't have. Breece Hall plays fine. Week 3, you see the New England Patriots. You see the best ran Jets offense that we have seen in literally since the last time they made the playoffs of my lifetime. Nick, we need to send you back to California so my Jets could play a little bit better. But that was the best game that the Jets had played. And who does Garrett Wilson have to see on the other side of the ball? Catches a touchdown. Christian Gonzalez, ranked as a top 10 corner by PFF. And then you have this past week, Patrick Surtain, one of the top 2 cornerbacks in football for Garrett Wilson. Next week,
I want to jump in real quick.
Sure.
The schedule has been tough, but if you're a top receiver, you can't lose every single matchup to a top corner. You got to win some of it.
this is where I want to get into it. So now next week he plays the Vikings. The Vikings have been the number one defense in football through 4 weeks going into London. They do not have a cornerback at the level of the top 4 corners. So Garrett Wilson is not Justin Jefferson. He is not Jamar Chase. He is not Amon-Ra St. Brown. He is not CeeDee Lamb. He is not one of the 5 best wide receivers in football. He is more in the tier of your Terry McLaurins, your Chris Olaves, your Drake Londons, of you might be a 1, but you would be a lot better as a 1B. So having said that, this is a defense where we're going to really find out Garrett Wilson. And I said it on the I think I said it on the Tuesday pod, which you were away for. This was going to be his toughest matchup of the year, Garrett Wilson. And if you are a believer, and I'm not saying I am, if you do think Garrett Wilson will be better, this is the time to trade for him.
Sure.
Because he could go out there and have a day against the Vikings, and then the rest of the season lightens up. I mean, the Buffalo defense is tough, but we just watched the Ravens cook them, and I know I didn't want to talk too much Jets, but I do got to defend my boys a little bit, but I will not defend that loss. We should have won that game. So
no, that's not a game you look at the schedule and say we're losing that one when we're healthy. No. And last thing, I don't know what it was, but Breece Hall should have had a day. Like that, they are not a good rushing defense. Breece Hall should have had a day. Don't know what happened.
It was the rain in the MetLife turf. That was the problem.
Yeah, the turf. All right. Why don't we go on to your next take? What do you got?
You mentioned his name, and we've been ignoring one of the top draft picks in fantasy who has not taken his next projected step and been a bust to this point, Bijan Robinson. His ADP was the 2nd or 3rd running back off the board. Christian McCaffrey has not played a single game. If you readjusted and new CMC was out 2 weeks before your draft, Bijan would have probably been the 101, 102, or 103 for fantasy football. No questions asked. Here's what's going on, though. He is getting his snap share worked into, and we blamed Arthur Smith last year. I don't know if we can blame it anymore because Bijan has not been great in week 1. Tyler Algier had an 18% snap share, and Bijan Robinson had a 90% snap share. This past week, Algier gets all the way up to 38%, and Bijan is down to 64%. He has not cracked the top 15 running backs any of the first 4 weeks of fantasy football. Nick mentioned earlier he's a running back 16. It's because he's been consistent. You want to know who else was consistent that finished around that ranking that you took early in your fantasy football drafts? First round pick, expected to take the next step, Najee Harris. That's what Bijan Robinson is doing right now. He is producing on volume, and you hope that he finds the touchdown to make him very successful for fantasy, and you hope that he gets integrated more into the passing game. I'll give him this. He has gotten a lot more PPR work than Najee ever did, but he has not been great. He has looked, the eye test says he looks really good on the football field. If you watch him play, he's going between the tackles. He's getting to that next step, but he is not delivering for fantasy football. We always say it. There's guys that are not good at football that translate to fantasy, and there are guys that are not great, that are great in football and don't translate to fantasy. Bijan is teetering on that point. And again, to the Garrett Wilson point, he could be a great trade for candidate because someone's probably looking at him in the lineup saying, like, you're not really game-wrecking games, but he still has a lot of that name value, so it might be harder to trade for him. But if he takes that next step up, which I think plenty of us would project him to do, he will be a league winner if you can trade for him a little bit.
That's why I drafted him. I mean, I'm right there with you and not happy about it. So I'll go to my next point. So I called this watch the running back splits. So Nick already broke down the Falcons ones. Let me talk about some other teams where committee situations or breakout situations are happening. My favorite one, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I called this one weeks ago. And the thing that sucks about this is I was all over Bucky Irving and I got Bucky Irving nowhere. And it wasn't my fault. It's because when he was owned in 4.5% of ESPN leagues, he was owned in all 4 of my competitive leagues. Even if I take Dynasty out of it, he was owned in 3 of my other competitive leagues. One of them a 10-man league. He was owned everywhere, even owned in 4.5% of leagues. I play with too much competition. The Bucky Irving breakout is right there. So these are the splits. Both of them had 10 carries. Both of them had 49 rushing yards. Bucky Irving got the touchdown, and he got multiple goal line opportunities. Rachaad White had 2 receptions on 3 targets. He also played 45 of 75 snaps. Bucky Irving had 2 receptions on 2 targets, and he played on 32 of 77 snaps. Bucky Irving's right there. He's very, very close. I think it's tough to play either one of those running backs right now, but when we get those questions on Sunday morning, I might start leading Bucky Irving.
Nice.
The Bengals, Zach Moss, 15 carries for 51 yards, 4 receptions on 4 targets. He played 27 of 67 snaps. Chase Brown had 15. I feel like this is wrong. Can you please cross-reference this? Who played more snaps? Because the note I have here, and I think I'm wrong on this. I thought Zach Moss played more snaps. Can you check the doc you sent me?
Sure.
Chase Brown, 15 carries for 80 yards and 1 touchdown, 2 receptions on 3 targets. He played 40 out of 67 snaps. I thought that Zach Moss played more snaps. I just want Nick to cross-reference.
Zach Moss played 40, Chase Brown 27.
That's what I thought. So I was wrong. So Zach Moss did get more snaps. So Zach Moss had 40 snaps on 67. Chase Brown had 27 on 67. So Zach Moss did play more snaps, but Chase Brown was much more effective with the opportunity given to him. Mm-hmm. This feels like a committee situation. I don't know if Chase Brown is going to lap Zach Moss. I think they'll both be used, but this does feel like a committee situation. And it kind of does feel like they can be flexed or played in your lineup due to bye weeks, especially maybe if Jerome Ford's not going to be playable once Chubb gets back, most likely. So it's one to watch. For the Packers, I'm not as worried about this one, but we need to watch it. Josh Jacobs, he had 9 carries for 51 yards, 4 receptions on 6 targets. I know the game script wasn't great. He played 46 out of 76 snaps. Then there's Emmanuel Wilson, who had 8 carries for 27 yards, 1 target, played 30 out of 76 snaps. If you're a Jacobs owner, you may want to scoop up Wilson just in case, but I'm not as worried about it. They paid him a lot of money over 3-4 years. The game script was terrible this week. We haven't seen what the Packers offense looks like yet, and I don't think they're ready to give up on Jacobs. Nick mentioned the Falcons, so I can go to the Jaguars. Travis Etienne, 11 carries for 50 yards, 1 reception on 2 targets. He has not looked good this year. He played 30 out of 58 snaps. Tank Bigsby had 7 carries for 90 yards. One of those rushes was like 58 yards. He played 17 out of 58 snaps. Kind of the same situation where I'm not super duper worried yet, but one to watch. Then there's the Bears. I thought this was going to look much different. I'm sure Nick did too. DeAndre Swift, 16 carries, 93 yards, and 1 touchdown, 7 receptions for 72 yards. He had 7 targets. He played 38 out of 60 snaps. And there's Roschon Johnson, 7 carries for 26 yards and a touchdown, got the goal line work, played 22 out of 60 snaps. Another one I think to watch, but it seems like they gave Swift another opportunity, and he played very well against a decimated Rams defense. So the point of this tape is if you have any of these 10 players, 12 players, be cautious and have the backups just in case so you're not snapped.
Yeah, totally.
All right. Was that one of your points that you wanted to carbon copy?
No. So the last 3 are the 3 I have.
Good. So I guessed correctly, and I did go off your Bijan take. Okay. Your third point, your third takeaway.
So you talked a little bit about this team earlier in the show. I'm going to give you a fun trivia question that the people at home could play with. Nick, who do you think averages the most points per game at the quarterback position?
Daniels.
No, it is not Jaden Daniels. Jaden Daniels, I believe, is number 2 in points per game.
Who is it? Has he
it
played
is
all 4 games?
Jordan Love.
Doesn't count. He's only played 2 games.
It counts. He's averaging more points.
No. Sample size isn't there.
Another fun fact for the Packers team, which is, and we'll get into why I like Wicks with this, a little bit more stats. Jaden Reed is one of only 3 receivers to score more than 27 points in 2 games this season. The other 2 are Neighbors and Nico Collins. So these 2, and another very important factor, another reason I love Wicks for this next span, if you need a player, the Packers over the next 5 weeks have the easiest schedule for wide receivers and for quarterbacks. All 5 of their games are against teams that rank in the bottom or in the top 10 for points allowed to these 2 positions. And you got to imagine Jaden Reed only in his second year, Jordan Love in his second year as a starter are going to build on this rapport. And I would imagine that Wicks gets worked into this as well. I imagine that Romeo Doubs has upside there. So I know that we're a little bit hesitant on the Packers receivers, but look at what we thought going into the season. We said the Bears had 3 good receivers. We said that the Texans had 3 good receivers. We had no problem drafting 3 of those guys. So I'm not saying that they're going to all deliver, but I could imagine that there's a world where 3 of these receivers finish in the top 30. It might not be as efficient as you'd want it to be, Like, you might not have the consolidated targets where Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs are getting in comparison to Tank Dell, but there's a real opportunity for Wicks, Reed, and Dobbs to all finish in the top 30, especially now that Christian Watson's injured. And we talk about division matchups all the time. The Packers, we said before the season, are in a division meant for shootouts. Between the Minnesota Vikings and the Detroit Lions, there's shootout games all over the park for these guys. So I'm going to expect and project that these guys are going to have just as good of seasons. I don't know if Jaden Reed's going to average over 27 points per game with Jordan Love in the game. But what I am saying is he's got a very good shot to finish inside the top 12, and Jordan Love has a very good upside for a more pocket than mobile quarterback to finish inside the top 10, which we don't see very often from those fringe guys.
All right, Nick. This is the part where I'm going to hold both of us accountable. The Vikings offense is legitimate. 4 weeks, you can, and again, a matchup against San Francisco. They played. Who else did they play? They played Green Bay. I forget who they played week 3. But I know week 1 they had the Giants. But they're legitimate, and we have to call them out for that. So Sam Darnold right now sits as the quarterback 4 on the season. His finishes are 13-4. 9 and 7. He's the only quarterback that threw multiple touchdown passes in each game this season. He's been top 10 in each of those last 3 games as well. This is where I hold you accountable, Nick. Justin Jefferson, he's been a stud. You were kind of out on him. He's wide receiver 3 right now. He has 15 plus fantasy points in all 4 weeks, and he's the only wide receiver to do so. Aaron Jones, running back 7. And I know, I don't think either of us were high on Jones, but we weren't out on Jones. We did say follow the money.
I was out on Aaron Jones.
I was not out on Jones. I like following the money. Running back 7, 17 plus fantasy points in 3 out of 4 games. And lastly, Jordan Addison, for the first game, he was fully healthy for the entire game, 22.9 fantasy points in week 4. I hold myself accountable because I kind of had the Vikings offense as a bottom 5 offense, the one I did not want to target going into the season. I think I did, at least. I think he was in, maybe I'm forgetting our own show, but I'm pretty sure I had the Vikings in our bottom 5 offenses. I did not want to mess with Sam Darnold, and I was wrong about that. So moral of the story, they're legit, and all 4 of these players I think should be started week in and week out. Like, I mean, Nick, like I'll call a shot right here. Would you rather, maybe not this week against the Jets defense, but would you rather have Sam Darnold or Patrick Mahomes the rest of the season?
Ugh.
Where do you think Patrick Mahomes is sitting right now?
16, 15.
You're close. He's 14. Would you rather have Sam Darnold or Patrick Mahomes the rest of the season? Patrick Mahomes does not have Rashee Rice.
I will go with Sam Darnold. I won't make the trade, but I do get the point.
How about this one, Anthony Richardson or Sam Darnold? I know we were out on Richardson.
That's an easier one. That's an easier one. I'll take Darnold there.
What about Joe Burrow? He's 11.
I would take Joe Burrow in that spot.
What about Stroud? He's 10. You were out on Stroud.
I'd take Darnold.
Okay, well, there you go. There you go. Like, legitimate. He's right there. The only top quarterback that was drafted high that's really living up to the potential is Lamar Jackson at quarterback 2. And I guess we could say Allen at quarterback 5, who just put up a stinker. But I mean, 2 out of Allen's matchups are less than 10 points. Yep. One of those was against the Miami Dolphins, who doesn't have a good defense. I think it was against no, it wasn't against the Dolphins. It was against who they have week 2. Let's see. Bills.
Buffalo, they had the Dolphins.
So who they?
It was the James Cook show.
Oh, it was the James Cook show. Okay. Yeah, week 3 was the Jacks. Okay. But still, did again? I digress. They should be locked to your lineups every week, including Sam Darnold. I wouldn't play him against the Jets, but I would avoid most quarterbacks against the Jets. So there you go.
Yeah. I am going to go with the next take, and
this is number 4, right? Technically,
take number 4.
Take number 4.
Take away 4. And the reason why I knew Patrick Mahomes was in that range was because I had notes for it. Because I'm talking about the Chiefs and how they're going to have this whole reformed offense.
That is one of my favorite offseason takes every year on this show. Is I bust Patrick Mahomes every single year because I tell you should not be drafting him in round 3. I love it. It's one of my favorites every single year.
Listen, if he didn't win the Super Bowl, if he got eliminated to Lamar in the conference championship 1 year, his ADP would drop to like 6, 7, or 8. It's because he always shows up and out in the playoffs that we put him that high. And you can respect it, but for fantasy, that doesn't always translate. So I'm going to, like I mentioned earlier, this was one of the worst weeks of football in my life between my Jets, my fantasy teams, my takes. Just watching Sam Darnold be better than any Jets quarterback I've seen in my lifetime through 4 weeks. And this one was one of the ones that hurt the most. And it was watching my guy all off season, Rashee Rice, get tackled by his own quarterback and most likely tear his ACL and be done for the
And
season.
Nick was looking completely correct on this take. There's really
Rashee Rice was the wide receiver 2 going into this week. He is the wide receiver 9 before the Monday Night Football matchups from how far ahead he was.
So I mentioned Jefferson's the only wide receiver at 15 plus fantasy points through 4 weeks. Well, Rashee Rice's numbers are 17, 18, and 29. So I'll let Nick get to his take now, but I do want to state that Nick is not wrong on his take because he got hurt. Like, you can't fault the guy for getting hurt. He was right on everything he said about Rice this offseason.
You watch the talent, you say he's the biggest outlier that you've seen in fantasy, and it sucks. His season ended like his offseason did in a catastrophic crash. But listen, you now have an opportunity as a fantasy owner to win a fantasy league. And it's because of the Chiefs offense that you're going to get to see it. And I know people are going to be hesitant, and it'll probably be the next week or two for who is going to take the step up. You see Xavier Worthy, who leads the team in routes, but only gets 3 targets because he is not going to be a PPR guy. He's going to be a downfield burner, and you need the one play to make or break your week. You see Kareem Hunt now lapping Steele and Samaje Perine, getting a ton of work, maybe gets the reins. Kelsey finally gets a good game with no Rashee for most of the game. Good, not great. Mahomes, QB 14 on the year, like Nick mentioned. Probably gets jumped by Geno and Goff tonight. So maybe drops all the way down to 16. You get Pacheco, who's gone for and out for weeks. You have Hollywood, who's most likely out for the year. It is horrible for fantasy. Here is where I think you have an opportunity to win your league. I'm going to call my shot now on 2 receivers to go trade for, because the Kansas City Chiefs are going to buy on the nickel dime, whatever the saying is, where you get a player on a good deal and better than their value should have been. We saw them do it with Kadarius Toney a couple years ago, where they brought him in and he played a big role in that Super Bowl run, as much as we want to clown him. Same thing for Juju Smith-Schuster. There are 2 veteran receivers on horrible teams that we think want out, and then there's one talented receiver that's been telling us he wants out. That's younger but sitting in the background. Here's the 3 that I think the Chiefs have a good opportunity to trade for. DeAndre Hopkins, 0-4 Tennessee Titans, veteran guy, not on a huge contract, opportunity for him to get traded and want out of there. No reason for him to stay in Tennessee, not too far of a trip to Kansas City, Missouri, not Kansas City, Kansas, because apparently Kansas City's in Missouri, and go play for the Chiefs for very little draft compensation. They do not need to pay him much. They paid Calvin Ridley, they paid Tony Pollard. They are not going to win games. It makes sense for them to move him. Then the 2 other guys are on the Cleveland Browns. Amari Cooper, they are going to be stuck paying a lot of that contract. We saw Amari Cooper voice in the offseason. He would be totally fine being traded to the 49ers. He's had 1 good game out of 4. That offense looks pedestrian. There is no reason for them to keep him, for them not to make a playoff run. And the deeper guy on the same team in the Cleveland Browns, Elijah Moore. Fits the Kadarius Toney type of mold. Fits the Kansas City Andy Reid mold. Young receiver, good in motion, good deep down the middle of the field. Could be a middle of the field threat like Rashee Rice was. Nowhere near the talent, but a guy that I don't know if you saw this, just like Odell Beckham, his dad was tweeting, "Why is my son not getting playing time?" Led to issues in the team. Any of these 3 guys, I do think, will wind up a Kansas City Chief by the end of the season, by the trade deadline. It's whichever one could have the upside of the league winner. So I am more than willing to take my deep shot, and I might mention it on the podcast on Friday. Haven't totally decided that Elijah Moore is that guy because he's rostered absolutely nowhere, or that DeAndre Hopkins, who's getting dropped in a lot of leagues, or Amari Cooper, who people are dying to get rid of, are available for cheap. I'm a buyer on all 3 of those at the moment.
Okay. I have here that the Carolina Panthers players are now playable with Andy Dalton. And the thing is, this went from a team this is like my favorite streaming defense option. And this looks really bad on Bryce Young. And here's why. So Andy Dalton, through his first 2 starts here, top 10 quarterback both weeks, 16 plus fantasy points in both games, over 220 yards in each game. Deontay Johnson with Andy Dalton, a 35.2 target share per game, 23.8 fantasy points per game, 27 total targets over 2 weeks, 15 receptions, over 200 receiving yards, and a touchdown in each game. He's a top 10 wide receiver in both weeks, and Deontay Johnson is now going to wreck lineups every single week. Xavier Legette at 19.6 in week 4, 6 for 10 on 66 yards and a touchdown. Then there's Jabba Hubbard, 22 plus fantasy points in each game, 100 yards in each of those games at 4 plus targets in each, a top 6 back both weeks. What does this mean for Jonathan Brooks? I don't know, because Hubbard looks good. If he either turns to a committee, or this will make things even better for Brooks when he comes off the IR over the next week or two. But point being, the Panthers are going from a team where you stream your defense against to a pretty competitive football team that you can play your fantasy players against. That looks really bad for Bryce Young. I do kind of feel bad for him, but that looks really bad on Bryce Young. So
yeah.
Your last take for week 4.
I want to talk a little bit more about the Texans offense, and they've kind of, been a little neglected because they haven't had the fun fantasy matchups or football matchups. We watched them go up against the Vikings, the Bears, the Jaguars in a corner game this week. So let's talk a little bit about the fantasy numbers because we've ignored it a little bit. Nico Collins, wide receiver 2 on the year, averaging 22.7 points per game. Phenomenal. Stephon Diggs. I said it I think it was during our draft or one of our later episodes in the offseason. I started really rising on Diggs, but just could not get him in my drafts anymore because I felt he was falling too far down. Wide receiver 7 on the year right now. 3 games over 18.5 points. Been very consistent, keeping his tone down, and been a good part of winning culture. Tank Dell, not delivering. Wide receiver 74 on the year right now. We know that's going to get jumped tonight by some players that are later down the board. So that number is going way down. And he hasn't shown any signs of producing elite wide receiver production. Maybe he's not 100% since the injury. Maybe it's still he's undersized. Maybe there's too much talent on the team. Whatever it is, it's not translating to fantasy. And it goes into why statistically 3 receivers never finish inside the top 30. It's happened once in NFL history, and none of those guys finish above 17. Stephon Diggs and Nico Collins are too talented to not have at least one of them finish near that top 10.
You don't trade for Stephon Diggs to not give him a large target share.
Exactly. And my biggest problem with the Texans, and it's been in line with one of my preseason predictions, is CJ Stroud is not panning out for fantasy. And he had a very good week this week, so I don't want to kill him too much. There's still 4 more quarterbacks going. I don't think Snoop's going to lap him, but Jared Goff, Geno Smith, 2 guys I could definitely get past.
I think he'll stay at 10 this week. I think he'll stay at 10. I don't think any of those guys are going to jump him this week.
I mean, like on the weekly finish. So
on the weekly finish.
So he was drafted as the QB5. Here's his finishes so far. Finished as QB8, QB16, QB25, and QB5, but obviously the games to go tonight. As great as his top talents are playing, it's not translating to fantasy. So right now, I believe he's the QB 10 on the season, maybe 9. The problem that I had with him is he's a pocket quarterback, and pocket quarterbacks do not always translate to fantasy. Right now, he has 11 rushes for 41 yards, and it's killing him. The guys above him, Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts, 5 very mobile quarterbacks. I know what you're thinking. Baker, Darnold, those guys are above him too. Every single one of those quarterbacks has more points on the ground than he does. So here's my prediction for CJ Stroud, who I think is a very talented quarterback. I will keep saying it. Very talented quarterback does not translate to fantasy. Here's the class of quarterbacks he's going to wind up with. Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes. Super talented, does not translate to fantasy. Herbert should be on your waiver wire. I don't think he's outscored 12 points in a single game. Joe Burrow, hit or miss every week. Patrick Mahomes, hit or miss every week. It all depends on the touchdowns and if the running backs steal them instead. And granted, Joe Mixon hasn't been stealing it because he's been hurt, but we saw it in the first 2 weeks. We saw Joe Mixon look really, really good. So the fact is CJ Stroud is going to need some very, very big weeks to make up for it and deliver on his ADP. If not, he's going to be one of those fringe quarterbacks that is a start sit based off who the matchup is, because that's how it works for quarterback in this league.
Or you just need an elite pocket quarterback like Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield to run your fantasy.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, totally. Or Derek Carr.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about our quarterback 1 on the season. It's Jaden Daniels, and it's a guy that me and Nick were both high on. I mean, we both loved him in round 10. I got him nowhere. It's just the way that it shook out. There was a league that I should have taken him in that I ended up with Caleb and Gino. I should have taken him in the league. I didn't. Wasn't because I didn't like the talent. I wanted a receiver or something. I don't know. But through 4 weeks, he's the quarterback one. He has 25 plus fantasy points in 3 out of 4 games. The only quarterback to do so. The Commanders have punted once in the last 3 games. The Commanders are scoring 20 plus fantasy points in all 4 games and 30 plus in the last 2. Their defense is bad, so the offense is going to really have to just ramp things up for the rest of the season. This last game, though, Jaden Daniels was 26 for 30. I don't care what team you're playing for. He had 4 incompletions. I don't care if they're dinks and dunks. I don't care what team you're facing. That's 4 incompletions as a rookie on 30 passes. That's a lot of passes. That's a lot. That's not a small number. He had 1 touchdown, 1 interception, a 96 passer rating, and 41 rushing yards and a touchdown. I don't want to field Jaden Daniels questions anymore, and I will answer them. I'll answer every question that you guys do on the lives. I don't care what the other quarterback is. I want to play Jaden Daniels. It would have to be Jaden Daniels against the Jets and Lamar Jackson against
the Panthers.
The Panthers? Like it would have to be something like that. Like I knew a friend that had Jalen Hurts and he had Jaden Daniels, and he ended up trading Daniels in a package. I didn't want him to do this trade, by the way, because I think Daniels is more valuable than Hurts. But at this point, I don't know what matchup I would bench him against. It would have to be something like the Jets or the 49ers. Like, I don't want to bench him. He's too good. He's too valuable. He runs. He's too valuable to me. And I'm done with fielding those questions because he should be playing every week.
So I'm going to give you one last one because you mentioned the situation. In my Dynasty League, I have the same exact situation. I drafted Jalen Hurts early because I wanted to lock up a quarterback, and I drafted Jaden Daniels late. And I am now in a spot where I need to make the decision between the two of them. I am trying to trade Jalen Hurts in a package for either like CeeDee Lamb or like straight up.
I think you should trade Hurts, and you could just get a backup quarterback in a year or two if Jaden Daniels doesn't pan out. I think we've seen the best of Jalen Hurts. I don't think we've even seen the best of Jaden Daniels.
I hear that, and
that's not a knock on Hurts, but ever since Shane Steichen left, that offense, like again, I don't gamble. I told everybody I know that gambles, take the Bucs this week. The Eagles are down receivers. Hurts does not play well against the Bucs. The Eagles have been in a downward trend since losing Shane Steichen. I think we've seen the best of Jalen Hurts. That's not a knock on him. I think he's fine. I don't think he's elite. I think he's fine.
Okay.
That's a fantasy take and a real life take, by the way.
One quick stat for Jaden Daniels. Do you remember what Caleb Williams said to his punter before the season?
That they're not going to punt, and then they've punted a lot. And Jaden Daniels hasn't punted once in 3 games.
1 punt in the last 3 games. They have scored on every other drive.
It's crazy.
Incredible. 82% completion percentage for a guy that we said is going to be a great runner and is averaging over 10 carries a game at the quarterback position. He is on pace to have the best rookie season ever by the quarterback position. So good for him.
And I was really close to nailing one of those super duper hot takes we did. I just had Caleb Williams over Jaden Daniels in the hot take. But my hot take was that Caleb Williams is going to surpass Cam Newton's rookie season fantasy numbers. But Daniels, I don't think Daniels will because Cam had so many rushing touchdowns, but he's going to have one of the best fantasy seasons for a rookie quarterback ever. He really is.
Yep. He's pacing it.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, that is our show, our first show for going into week 5, I should say. If you enjoyed it, let us know. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on an audio streaming platform like iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. Please make sure you're following us on social media. If you have any questions during the week, we can answer those questions on Twitter, Primetime FF Pod, Instagram, Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast, or Facebook, Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you guys for your support again. Make sure to set those waiver wires, and we'll talk to you guys on Friday.